In 2004, His Holiness the Dalai Lama was teaching in Toronto, giving an initiation, and I went. Um, and as he used to, often did, he was giving a public talk in the course of, maybe it was a 7 or 8, maybe 10-day teaching. It was long. But he was giving a public talk in the Coliseum in Toronto, which seated about 24,000 people, and it was a sellout. It was packed. And so this was in late April, early May in 2004. And for some reason, the security was especially tight. So to get into this public talk, all of these people were outside the Coliseum for a long time, like hours. We should have been able to go in and we couldn't. There was some security issue. And it was pouring rain, it was really cold. And that was at least the day or the day after when the Abu Ghraib photos first hit the press. So people may not remember that in 2004 there was a terrible scandal, actually, of in the early part of the Iraq War, where members of the U.S. Army and the CIA committed multiple human rights violations in prisons in Iraq. And the photos were horrible. There was sexual abuse. I mean, they were just disgusting. And so this was very much the topic of conversation. And now we were in Canada, right? So there's no reason not to bash the Americans. So this was totally the topic of conversation as people were sharing umbrellas and shivering together, waiting to see His Holiness. So eventually we all went in, wet, cold, but very happy to see him. And he gave a beautiful talk, as he always does. And at the end, he answers questions, as he always did. And one of the first questions, and maybe it was because of the weight of this conversation about what had just happened, but the first question was, in the face of so much what seems to be more and more horror, terror in our world, how do we maintain hope and, maintain our confidence that in the goodness of beings? And His Holiness paused for a moment, and he said, I don't agree. He said, I don't agree that things are worse now than they have ever been before. He said, in fact, I think they're better. And the Queen Mother, who was still alive at that time, the Queen Mother, who was probably around 100 years old, she's seen this whole century. She believes that things are better now, too. And His Holiness began to speak about, first of all, that in the course of the 20th century, that movements, towards the end of the 20th century, movements towards peace when war was about to happen, even the Iraq War he cited, nowhere in the world had there ever been 1 million people protesting the start of a war as had happened before that bombing. He went on to talk a little bit about the progress in terms of nations speaking with each other and treaties being aligned, and at that time less concern for nuclear weapons than there had been earlier in the late part of the 20th century. And then he went on to describe basically a kindness of others meditation. And he just said, think right this very minute throughout the world, parents are putting their children to bed with a kind heart. They're taking care of them. They're putting them to sleep with love. All around the world, right this minute, in hospitals, in every city and small town, people are receiving medical care. They're receiving support. They're receiving exactly what they need. Billions of people. He went on to describe the kindness of strangers, moment by moment by moment by moment. So this is, of course, the Bodhisattva speaking. And the radiance coming from him as he spoke was amazing. But the impact for me was that, all right, there's 24,000 people, right? As soon as that question was asked, you could almost feel the whole room go, right? That question of how terrible things are. And as His Holiness spoke about the kindness of others, the energy in that room got lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter. He went on probably for 15 minutes on kindness and what exists in the world. By the time he finished, it was like the whole Colosseum was filled with light. It was unbelievable. It was one of the most profound moments of recognizing the power of the Dharma that I've experienced. And it has given me a lot of conviction in the power of that meditation on the kindness of others to transform my own mind and to transform the minds of others. So this came to mind because the Abbey was invited just this week to a vigil by the faith leaders of conscious, vigil on the faith leaders and leaders of conscience, which meets regularly. It's a local group who's very, very involved in wanting to, especially in our area, overcome the white supremacist movements, to overcome racist activities and so forth. And they meet very regularly. So this vigil was to mourn a lot of what's been in the news lately. The killing of Ahmaud Arbery was up despite the verdict that came. The Kyle Rittenhouse trial, the school shooting that happened, another one that very same day. I mean, there was a long list of things in the news lately. And it was a very beautiful time to be with a group of people to acknowledge the grief. But when I called or wrote and said, yes, I'll come do it for the Abbey, but I said, we don't do lament. What we do is hope. Not to deny what's happening. It's not the Buddhism is not a practice of denial in any way, shape, or form. The Buddha told us that we must face what's happening, and not just the gross suffering, but the very subtle, moment by moment by moment experience of being born in bodies existing under the influence of ignorance and our own past karma. But this piece about actually rejoicing or being able to find joy in the face of what is despicable sometimes, I think is a really, really important part of our practice. When His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu collaborated on their book, The Book of Joy, that people have really appreciated so much, they looked back on their long lives. This is their mission. They looked back on their long lives to answer a single burning question: how do we find joy in the face of life's inevitable suffering? Well, we look for where there is love. We look for where there is compassion. We look for what is good. And His Holiness says, we appreciate how rare and full of potential your situation is in this world. Then take joy in it and use it to your best advantage. And although that's not in this quote, to the advantage of others. That's exactly what he would be saying for us. So this practice of rejoicing, this practice of recognizing the kindness and really taking joy in it. It didn't come with the Puritans. That's not their point of view. It's not, I don't think, kind of our American cultural point of view. We get hung up on thinking if I have something good, I should feel guilty about it. Or if I recognize happiness or if somebody else is suffering, for me to be compassionate, I have to be in pain too. But that is not what he was teaching. And that's not what I witnessed when I watched 24,000 people be lifted up just by thinking of mundane kindness. And we can do this every single day, many times a day. Lama Zopa Rinpoche's generating happiness is the means of practicing rejoicing. And this is a bodhisattva's action. So I think it's, at least I know it's true for me, and I think culturally it's a challenge. It's easy to overlook rejoicing. We only think rejoicing when you hear the Christmas carols and the angels were, out and had one nice night where they rejoiced and it's been terrible ever since, or whatever your. But that's not what rejoicing is about. It's taking delight in that which is good, taking delight in virtue. And then also acknowledging that when we have good things, where you can say, did I eat today? Yes, I did. That's a result of virtue. And I can be grateful for that and rejoice. And then I can take it a step further, and therefore I can also be generous and practice this with others and make more merit for the future. So it's rejoicing season, so they say. But to find a way, I think, to bring rejoicing into our practice, which reinforces our virtue, which makes us inspired to keep creating virtue and keeps a happy mind, which really. It's all we want, right? To develop some happiness by rejoicing.